preacher went out to hunting. It was on a Sunday morning. Although it was against his religion, he took his gun along, shot himself some very fine quail and one little measly hare. But on his way returning home, he met a grizzly bear. Well, the bear stepped down to the middle of the road right up to the preacher, you see. That preacher got so excited that he went up a cinnamon tree. Well, the bear sat down in the middle of the road, and the preacher climbed out on the limb, cast his eyes to the Lord in the skies, and these words he says to him. Said, "Oh Lord, you delivered Daniel from the lion's den, and Jonah from the belly of the whale, and the Hebrew children the fiery furnace, and the good book you do tell. Well, now, oh Lord, if you don't help me, goodness sakes, don't you help that bear."
Well, we spent quite a bit of time with Harvey. We moved here to Eola from Neon about, I think it's been over 20 years ago. And Harvey was one of the first people that we met when we came here. We'd heard some neighbors talking about him, so one day and Evan, our son Evan, was just a few months old at that time, less than a year. So we just walked up and introduced ourselves to him, and of course Harvey just invited us in, and you know, we pretty much became friends from that point on. His house was quite unique. He built it himself.
I don't know if it was this house or another one, but he built it for less than $50. I mean, all the wood was, a lot of it was scrap wood or salvaged from wherever. The windows came from cars that had been junked. And a friend of ours, how did he refer to the roof?
Well, he said, now there's a roof line with a personal touch.
The value of his house kind of collided with the value of neighboring houses.
Yeah. Some people
and he didn't believe in mowing grass because it was kind of a Johnny Appleseed type characteristic. Stories about Johnny Appleseed say that he'd put out a fire if he saw that it was drawing gnats and they were flying into the fire and dying. So Harvey was kind of that mind, so he didn't believe in mowing and destroying habitat and whatever insects and that might be living in the grass.
And so we just took this old logging road and went about half a mile to a mile around that road, and there was another little road that turned off that looked like it wasn't used very much, and there was a barbed wire fence with a carved wooden sign that said no motorized vehicles allowed. And I thought, that's got to be Harvey.
Well, the preacher stayed up in that tree, I think it was all night. Said, "Oh Lord, if you don't help me, you're going to see an awful fight." About that time the limb gave way and the preacher come tumbling down. Now you ought to see him get his razor out before he hit the ground. Well, the preacher hit the ground cutting right and left. He put up a very clean fight. But then that bear got that preacher, and he squeezed him a little too tight, because the preacher lost his razor, but the bear held on to him then. As he cast his eyes to the Lord in the skies, these words he says to him. Said, "Oh Lord, you delivered Daniel from the lion's den, and Jonah from the belly of the whale, and the Hebrew children the fiery furnace, and the good book you do tell. And oh Lord, if you don't help me, goodness sakes, don't you help this bear."
The school suggested that he be homeschooled. And a doctor told him at that time that just because he couldn't go to school didn't mean that his education had to end, that he should read every single book he could get his hands on. So that's what Harvey started to do.
There was a neighbor girl had told him that all the libraries she'd read about had secret room hidden behind a bookshelf, and so he made the bookshelf so that if you pressed it in a certain place, it would slide by itself. And then there was just this little room behind it, and that's where he kept a lot of the cutout toys that he made. He was always giving little toys, things he cut out to kids. And I remember he told me a story about being in Whitesburg one time, and a little boy came up to him and said, "Are you really Santa Claus?" And Harvey just knelt down and said, "Shh, don't tell anyone." Harvey had heard I was sick, so he cut, like these are, cut my name, Sharman, all connected, cut that out, and then made it into a balancing toy, kind of like the guy with the saw up there on the shelf. You know, and he said he hoped my health was soon back in the balance. You know, I mean, just,
cool.
yeah, just, so you always got, somehow, you always got more back than you gave,
Yeah.
you know.
Neat. That.
Here, everybody needs a little love.
He used to backpack all over the country. He'd just get in the mood to take off, and he'd load stuff in a backpack and hitchhike and, you know, ride trains or whatever. And he said it was riding a train once, and he had his hammock with him. He had it stretched out between two, I don't know how he fastened it on this, I guess it was a flatbed or something, but the train was moving real slowly across this intersection. There was a car parked right at the first car in line was this really fancy, I don't know, some kind of very expensive car.
It was convertible.
Yeah, and there were two men in business suits sitting there, and Harvey said, as the train went by and he looked at them, they had this look of envy on their faces, and he said, and why not? They were driving a $30,000 automobile, and I was riding $1 million train. That was Harvey's approach. You know, that was his attitude towards life. You know, that I don't know. He just seemed to always be in step with himself and really know who he was. And obviously, some people probably strongly disagreed with his choices of lifestyle and, you know, the way he spent his life. You know, if your priority is to be successful, like we talked about in the eyes of our culture, by making a lot of money and being, you know, powerful and all that, then obviously Harvey was not somebody that would impress you. But I don't know. It's like those two guys that were in the car when he rode the train by. I think even in with those kind of people, he might have had some sort of impact. You know, might have made them take stock of what was really important. I like to think so.
A lot more people should have known Harvey. Their lives would be richer
Yeah.
for it. Ours certainly are.
He taught me to just enjoy life. I was probably the last person to talk to Harvey before he passed. And the very last thing he said to me was to thank me for caring, for letting him know that he had family that still cared. So he left me with that lesson, you know, to care. Harvey didn't really know his real father. His mother and father had divorced when he was around 1 year old. And he did tell me that at one point in his life, after he was an adult, he became curious about his father, and he knew that he was in West Virginia. So he hitchhiked to West Virginia, looked his father up, seen him, was satisfied, and hiked back to where he lived. From when I went down there in August, you know, and he passed away in December, I think that life was moving towards his death even then. I think Harvey needed to go on knowing that he still had family that cared. And why it worked out that everybody here thought he was dead for 14 years, I don't know.
Well, then the bear, he lost his balance. They both rolled down in the creek. I guess the bear didn't like the water, 'cause he took off with a streak. While the preacher laid there in the creek, tears was in his eyes. As he cast his eyes to the Lord in the skies, these words he says to him. Said, "Oh, Lord, I don't know what it's like from your point of view, but from down here, baptizing that bear has been the hardest job you ever gave me.